It's no secret that I've spent my entire life struggling with one chronic illness or another. Many years ago, I wrote a book with one of my dear friends, Deanna Favre, called The Cure for the Chronic Life. And it talked about dealing with the struggles that come from life on both a physical and spiritual level. Maybe you're fighting pain, or someone you know is living in the chronic life. Today, I'm sharing some of our principles of overcoming the hopelessness that holds you back. Hey friends, welcome to You Matter podcast. I'm Shane Stanford. We're continuing our conversation about a book that I wrote about 15 years ago now called The Cure for the Chronic Life. My co-author and I spent a lot of time, both of us having significant medical issues in our life. And so we knew what it was like to be faced with living chronically, physically. But as we began to talk about the dynamics of what it meant to live in crisis in terms of your health, we also realized that there were a lot of people that we knew and a lot of times in our own lives when we were living chronically spiritually, or we were living chronically in terms of relationships or bad attitudes. And over time, those habits set into patterns, and those patterns will set into almost undeniably difficult decisions that you have to make. So what do you do to overcome that? Well, as we mentioned last week, I did not say The Cure for the Chronic Life and then try to find something to fit each of those letters. This was back in my acrostic stage. And what I had done is I had done a sermon on cure many years before I decided to write the book, and then just took it and went from there and found how those four principles over the course of my dealing with my own chronic life, how I found myself out of that stigma, out of that stress that kept me from not only seeing and experiencing the power of God in my life, but really kept me from experiencing the joy of serving and working with Christ. And so we talked about how first you have to have compassion. And this is a hard one. I think people think they're compassionate, but most people really, a study was done in terms of happy, responsive people. And we found that most of our society really are not compassionate. They have sympathy, but really, when it comes to compassion, as we talked about last week, stepping into the shoes of another person, really, instead of going, I'll walk near you, I'm going to walk with you. Those are different prepositions. The other is understanding that once you draw close to someone and you really begin to walk in their shoes, you're going to be gleaning a lot of information about how they see the world and about how the world has an impact on them. And so spending time, and I've made this statement last time, and I'll make it again this time, the best counseling is to get someone out of themselves. That is always the best counseling. If you can get someone who's got extreme issues talking about themselves immediately, that is awesome. But most people have to have prompts in their life. And the best way to help somebody do a prompt for being able to address their own garbage and their own material that needs to get out of their life is to help them serve someone else, to get out of just it being about themselves. Narcissism is one of the best tools that Satan uses, and we all have narcissistic tendencies. We're not all full-blown diagnosed narcissists, but we all have narcissistic tendencies from the time that we're born. The things that we want, we're learning to, as one of my friends called it, learning how to snatch and cry when you're a little one. And over time, you begin to see these changes happen. Well, we have a new grandson that we absolutely adore. And for the first few months of his life, he just basically, as he just was there. But then we began to see that personality come out, and we began to see that he was very strong-willed. And that is not surprising because his mother, my middle daughter, was very strong-willed. And therefore, Timothy's coming into this conversation of life with some things that he just brings to the table about how he's wired up. And that's the way a lot of us are. And so you can't ignore those things. I tend to be high strung. I tend to worry a lot. I tend to have to really struggle with anxiety. And over time, it's gotten worse. But I was born wired up as a tightly wound little man, is what some people have called me. And it is true that we do come into this world with a certain sense of things already wired up. But it's how we deal with the way the wiring works. That's really what is so critical to how we live out a life that's going to be healthy and productive. And no one is meant to be a Christian by themselves. That's important to understand. And so therefore, relationship is at the heart of everything when it comes to our faith. The relationship we have with God, the relationship of three persons of the Trinity, the relationship that we have with each other, with brothers and sisters, with people who are not brothers and sisters, who are unchurched, whatever that may be. Relationship is what defines it. But if you think about the non-religious part of your life, it's all about relationship. It's about who you work for, with, who you're working, what you're working to. It's about the relationships that mean the most, your maybe immediate family, but then also family and friends that have been chosen over the years. And so why is that so important? Because all of that fits into this algorithm that's happening in your life. And sometimes that algorithm is wonderful. And sometimes it is flawed at so many different and important places. So dealing with that, getting out of yourself, showing compassion, walking in the shoes of your brothers and sisters, and then seeking time to truly understand what it means to walk there. This is where I think a lot of people miss the mark. It's because we are, just as I've said, so focused on our own issues so many times that we don't even know how to look into the struggle or the circumstance of another person and truly feel it, not try to fix it, but do it just to simply be present with them. So much of my relationship with God has more to do with presence than anything else. And I've learned that over the years, that even when there's not a word going back between me and the Father or me and Jesus, I know there's a power in his presence. And that's what understanding was. So what did God do for us? God had compassion on us. He decided not to just have sympathy for us. Thank goodness he didn't just feel bad for us, but he had compassion on us. He decided he had to walk in our place. And that's what the incarnation was about. The incarnation was the walking in our shoes of Jesus Christ. And the power of that, friends, is just remarkable, because what it does is it changes everything. It adds a whole new compass to things and how important that is. But then you get to these last two principles, and you'll see that they are less to do with feeling or intellectual practice and more to do with the response or the action side. Last week, those two are more about idea. These two are more about action. And the first one is, if you want to get out of a chronic pattern in your life, you have to respond with new patterns. New decisions with new principles. Where do new principles and decisions come from? It comes from our values, the things that we say are important to us. I wrote a book several years ago called Journey Wise, which is about the Beatitudes. And what the nature of the Beatitudes, in my mind, really are the wisdom values of Jesus. That's why he preaches them at the start of this amazing Sermon on the Mount. And they're more than just poetic verse. They're more than just something you put on a keychain or on a bookmark. They really are the outline of what Jesus's whole point of the incarnation is about, to help us to empty ourselves so that we can be filled up with God, to help us find comfort even when we have loved and lost, to be merciful, to learn how to respond with compassion, what it means to be a peace lover and versus a peacemaker. Everybody I know is some way a peace lover, but what Jesus says, I want you to be a peacemaker. So what he's doing in that is he's giving us ways that we can specifically enter into the context. The problem with most people who have chronic illness, I hear this over the time, physical illness, is that they become removed from society. And so one of the great works that's happening in occupational therapy and in mental health care for those who are dealing with chronic illness, long-term chronic illness, is how do you engage them back into the community? How do you engage them into what it means for them to, in some way or another, both know and be known? And that's why I love, as I've said before, Mark chapter 1 so much. It is the story, not of just the beginning of Jesus and the story of the gospel, but the very first story that's told about an interaction between Jesus and someone who wasn't expecting him was about the leper at the gate. And the man, only time in Scripture that the man asked this question of Jesus, or that Jesus was asked this question, and it was, if you are willing, you can make me well. Are you willing? And Jesus's first response in terms of the power of what he could do to transform a life was in his response. It wasn't in the how and the mysticism and the miracles. It was just simply saying, I am willing to enter into your circumstance. I am willing to interact into whatever the place that you are living out of right now. I will go where you are is basically what God is saying to all of creation through the incarnation of Jesus. So much response, though, for Christians and even for non-Christians, but so much response for Christians really is about reaction. It's not about response. It's about reaction. And the difference between response and reaction is that a reaction is a spur of the moment, the next stage in a stimulus that happens in their life, whether it's a stimulus of pain or joy or whatever it might be in a relationship. And so most of us react to that. Well, here's the problem with most human reactions is they aren't very well thought out, and they really are simply all emotional, and therefore they don't have any lasting effect in terms of how it's going to change the circumstance. If you were to throw a snake at me when I came out my backyard on the porch, my reaction is probably going to be in several ways different than I normally react to anything else. And it's because that stimulus, I wasn't prepared for it. And I was simply trying to get out of the way. A lot of us don't like dealing with the chronic issues of life, particularly when it comes to chronic spiritual issues, because in order for us to do that, it's going to take a lot of effort. And that is, there's two in the last one, the E, C-U-R-E, R being response. You actually have to do something about it. You're going to be understanding. You're going to be walking with that person. So what do you do in order to engage back? Serving is all at the hands of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Jesus says, I didn't come to the world to be served. I came to serve. I didn't come to lord it over. I came to be a servant. And therefore, the first act he does before the last act he does before the crucifixion is he serves and washes the feet of the disciples. That is his response to the circumstances of what was going on around them. He knew more than they knew the importance of what that last meal was going to be and why that was going to be such a critical nature for their existence. And so response is it's not easy, but basically, and it's not, there's no right or wrong to it. If you are walking with someone, you're trying to understand their circumstance. What is it that you believe God is giving to you through the power of the Spirit to be able to help them deal with the chronic natures or patterns of their life? Now, here's where it helps you then, because as you are helping others, then you are also doing a lot of that work on the inside of you that you were not willing to do at the start. But what happens, the more we get out of ourselves, the more we're actually working on ourselves. And that is an old tool in Christian counseling. And that's why I think mission trips are so important. But let's not be mistaken here. Most mission trips don't do very much for the place where they go to be in mission. What it is it is a school of reformation and transformation for the person who's doing the work. And you're coming to not just an understanding, but you're actually putting hands to action in a circumstance where you can make a difference for Jesus. Which brings me to the last, to the E. And like I said, these are two different words. So it's curee, for the chronic life. The first being it requires effort. I just mentioned that. But no work in terms of dealing and helping someone through a chronic life comes without offering encouragement, because it won't happen the first time out. The first step someone takes, they're going to fall as a child. The first time that you try just about anything, you're not going to get it perfect. And so what do? You try again. And there is no better place to exhibit this than in our relationship as witnesses for Jesus Christ. Keep encouraging, keep working. Don't say, oh, well, you're fixed and move on. That's not the way relationships work. You know that. And being able to come to a healthy perspective of what it means for you to walk in that person's shoes, to be able to understand the nature of their brokenness as you then begin to understand your own. And then what does that response mean? Well, hopefully at the heart of that response, as the covering of that response, is encouragement. Because we live in a world where we are finding what I consider to be an epidemic lack of encouragement in the world right now. Everyone, because of social media and how you can respond to certain things, everybody's so quick to give their opinion or their attitude about something. But very little encouragement that you see in most situations that really primarily need encouragement. I was talking to a young woman the other day who had written, and then we emailed and ended up doing FaceTime. And she was telling me about some circumstances going on in her life. And a lot of the conversation kept coming back to her mother. And I'm not trying to be stereotypical here, but I have found in my ministry that moms and daughters have the same kind of stress that fathers and sons have. And we've heard about the father-son dilemma for, years and years and years. Well, this particular person, though, she wanted to please her mother, but at the same time, she was fighting for independence from her mother. And what was happening is that in every way that she knew that she loved her mother and that she wanted to work with her mom and that she wanted to help her mom get out of certain reactionary patterns that her mom had gotten into, she realized that she was only doing it out of obligation. She wasn't trying to understand where her mother might be in that particular journey. She wasn't quite sure then how she would respond, how she'll put her action into the conversation. But then she realized that what she could do was offer encouragement to her mother. We have all grown children now. Our 3 daughters are all adults, and my wife and I were talking about something, and my wife is a little more opinionated than I am, and our daughters like to get on to her and say that mom's first response is, well, here, what you ought to do is, and as we were talking about it, she just said, it's so frustrating because when they're younger, you feel like you can interact so much more into their life and what they're doing. And I said, well, really, the only tool we have left anymore is encouragement. And that really is the truth. They're making their own way in the world. 2 of them are married. And for me to be able to say to them at this point, you know what, you need to do A, B, and C, I would share that, but it may not get anywhere near what the issue or circumstance is that they're dealing with. So you see who's been working on whose chronic illness. I'm pouring myself out to try to help my neighbor, but what I'm doing in the first 2 especially is I'm recalibrating my own view of my own illness, of how I do or do not respond. And then in my response, being so specific to be uplifting and encouraging, what happens is that there are patterns that begin to shift, and decisions cause other patterns that are regenerated and that are able to be lived out more fully and completely. Friends, I know this is hard. I wish that there was an easy answer to it, but it's whatever you do to face the chronic nature of your spiritual walk or relationships, it's going to be just like all the hard work that goes into someone who has a chronic physical illness. You have to take your medicines. You have to take them regularly. You can't take one day and then take 5 days later a whole different set. You have to stay as healthy as you can be. You have to exercise. You have to eat right. You want people who are going to be encouragers in your life, who are going to help you be built up, not torn down. And so the whole nature of a physical chronic illness speaks very much to the other aspects of life that can also be chronic too. We'd love for you to go to our email at info@moorewestcenter.org, or you can go to our website at journeywise.network and see all of the wonderful resources we have. One of the things that we are working on that we hope will come out in 25 is a workbook study on anxiety called the Anxiety Algorithm. And a lot of the anxiety algorithm that we've tested now with a couple of pilot groups and have had nothing but great response, what we're seeing is that it is the proactive nature of entering into life, not waiting for life to happen to you, but entering into life. And a lot of what happens with a chronically physically ill person is they become so sedentary that other illnesses begin to take over the body as well. The organs begin to shut down. You're not getting enough oxygen. I mean, it cascades from there. Well, it's the same way in terms of our spiritual walk as well. We can find ourselves so detached, so in bad habits and decisions that we're missing the power of what it means to go as you go into the world every day to baptize and to teach others in the name of Jesus Christ. So again, go to our website at journeywise.network. I encourage you to look at our resources from our Life Along the Way 360-day journey with Jesus to our servant school. If you've ever taken masterclass, this is a faith-based masterclass system that helps you to take courses in a variety of topics in terms of faith and Bible study from some of the best experts around the world. We love you. We thank you. Go into the world and be salt and light. You matter. God bless you.